seeing a lot of ups and downs. We're seeing a lot of legislative issues that are impacting us. We're seeing a lot of power supply issues that are impacting us.
For a state like Wyoming, we're small, statewide, only 2 of us. I kind of view Basin's GR department as an extension of our office, particularly in Washington, D.C.
The previous Clean Power Plan, in my mind, was a train wreck because it did huge economic transfers from the middle of the country to the coast.
There are seismic changes going to the whole industry, whether it's generation, whether it's transmission, whether it's just distribution, the way we serve our members.
I don't see this plan doing the same. I see the plan coming in as meeting what the challenge is, finding the best solutions for managing the carbon, and leaving the options within the states where it's best served.
People have real concerns at the end of the line. What alternatives do we have for a path forward?
With the Public Utilities Policies Act, it seems like there needs to be changes made in that area.
We're better when we have a common vision and a common purpose and a common direction.
It's in the name, government relations. We have to maintain a relationship with our elected officials, and if I can't be in D.C. and Basin can be, they're speaking on our behalf, and it's a great relationship for us to have between us and Basin and our elected officials.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you especially for hanging in there to the bitter end. I appreciate that as well. It's been a long day. We're just about to the end of it. As everybody knows, we had a big election yesterday, so what I want to do is just give a quick summary of some of the major races in our service area. I know you're probably aware of what happened in your own state, but you may not be aware of what happened in the neighboring states, so we'll quickly run through some of those. In North Dakota, we had a Senate race. Kevin Kramer, our current congressman, defeated incumbent Heidi Heitkamp. In the House, which was open due to Representative Kramer running for the Senate, we had Kelly Armstrong, the Republican, defeated Max Schneider, the Democrat. In Wyoming, the governor's race was open, and Mark Gordon, the Republican candidate, won that race over Mary Throne. In the Senate, incumbent John Barrasso defeated Carrie Trauner, I believe is how you say that last name. Also in Wyoming, in the House race, incumbent Liz Cheney kept her seat over Democratic challenger Greg Hunter. In South Dakota, the governor's race was open, a very tightly contested race, and Kristi Noem, the Republican candidate, defeated Democratic candidate Billy Sutton for that. In the House, Republican Dusty Johnson defeated Tim Bjorkman for that seat. In Minnesota, the governor's race was also open, and that was won by Democrat Tim Walz, defeating Jeff Johnson. There was also a special Senate election in Minnesota to replace the vacated seat of Al Franken. Tina Smith, the Democratic candidate who was filling that interim position, did win that election over Karen Housley. Also in the Senate, there was the normal Senate race for Amy Klobuchar's seat. She defended that seat over Republican challenger Jim Newberger. House District 1 was won by Republican Jim Hagedorn over Dan Feehan. House District number 2 in Minnesota was won by Angie Craig, the Democratic challenger. She defeated incumbent Jason Lewis. House District number 3 was won by Dean Phillips, the Democratic challenger who defeated the incumbent Eric Paulson. District 4, Betty McCollum, the Democratic incumbent, retained her seat over challenger Greg Ryan. District 5, Ian Omar defeated Jennifer Zielinski in that seat, which was an open seat. District 6 was won by the incumbent Republican Tom Emmer over Ian Todd, the Democratic challenger. District 7, Colin Peterson, the Democratic incumbent, retained his seat over challenger Dave Hughes. Finally, in District 8 in Minnesota, which was an open seat as well, Republican challenger Pete Stobner defeated Joe Radonovich. So that was took care of Minnesota. Montana, this was called about around noon today that incumbent John Tester did retain that seat over Republican challenger Matt Rosedale. In the House, Greg Giafonte, the incumbent, kept his seat over Kathleen Williams. In Colorado, the governor's seat was open, and Jared Polis, the Democratic candidate, won that seat over Republican Walker Stapleton. And there was no Senate race in Colorado. The next Senate seat or Senate race will be with Cory Gardner in 2020. In Iowa, very contested, hotly contested race for governor. Kim Reynolds, who was the lieutenant governor, was filling out the term for Governor Terry Branstad, who was appointed to be ambassador of China. She was able to defend that seat very close over Fred Hubbell, the Democratic challenger. In House District number 1 in Iowa, Amy Finkenauer defeated incumbent Rod Bloom for that seat. House District number 2, Dave Loebsack, the incumbent Democrat in that, kept that seat over challenger Chris Peters. House District number 3, Cindy Axne defeated incumbent Republican David Young. And in District 4, Steve King, the incumbent Republican, kept his seat over challenger J.D. Schulten. Well, and the way we look, and I was down at the table kind of going through last-minute numbers, from what we're seeing right now, it currently stands at the Senate Republicans will have 51 seats, the Democrats will have 46. There are 3 races yet to be decided. In Mississippi, there will be a runoff election because neither candidate got over 50%. In Arizona, they haven't called that race yet. The Republican candidate has a 1-point lead over the challenger. In Florida, the Republican has a 50,000 vote lead out of 8 million votes cast. So those 2 have not been called, and Mississippi won't be called for a while yet. When you get into the House, the latest numbers that I've got are Republicans at 198, the Democrats at 221, and there are 16 undecided seats at that point. So those are what we got from the political side. One item of note, about an hour ago, it was announced that Jeff Sessions has resigned, the Attorney General, at Trump's request. So there will be Trump will be recommending a replacement Attorney General to replace Jeff Sessions, and then that will have to be confirmed by the Senate. So a lot of political action going on today. I want to make a quick note, and I don't know how many people know this, but Basin Electric has a political action committee. It's an employee-sponsored, employee-supported political action committee, and there are only certain employees that are eligible to be part of that PAC. But it's been going on for quite a few years, and we do contribute to a lot of races. It's a federally registered PAC, so we do federal Senate and House races. As far as contributions, we work with the statewide associations closely on when we make those contributions to the candidates, so they're aware of. We try to do those presentations as checks together, if possible, to do that. We also will support some state races as far as the governor and attorney general races. We do provide support there as well. And one other item to keep in mind is, as part of the policies of the PAC, if a current or retired cooperative employee or director decides to run for a state seat, the Basin Electric PAC will contribute to that campaign. So something to keep in mind in the future. Another thing that also happened was ballot measures, and we've been seeing this grow and grow in the last several elections. This year there were 154 ballot measures in 38 states. And they covered all kinds of gamuts of everything's going on. Some of the ones that happened in our area of interest, in North Dakota, there was a constitutional number 1, which is related as an ethics commission. The ethics commission will prohibit gifts to legislators, lobbyists delivering PAC checks. And it also establishes this commission that was mandatorily funded. And a couple of pretty things that we were concerned with, and Basin was active against this measure, is that there's a disclosure requirement. So if someone comes down, if any person comes down and tries to influence any state action and they spend over $200, they must report that $200. And along with that reporting mechanism, you must also state where you got the funding to provide that $200. So it's something that we think is fairly onerous. It did pass yesterday. It was not defeated. And so it's something that we'll have to keep our eyes on and figure out how we work within those confines within North Dakota. Another thing that you probably heard about in North Dakota was the vote for recreational marijuana. And that vote did not fail, or did not pass. It was defeated about 60% to 40%. We had some concerns on that from an employee policy issue where we've got policies against use of marijuana, and if it would have been a state legal activity, it would have created some concerns for us. In South Dakota, there was called the Measure W, which was similar to the North Dakota Ethics Commission in North Dakota. That had an accountability board. It also had authorization over legislators, campaign finance, and lobbying restrictions, but there wasn't the financial disclosure requirement. That measure was also defeated, or that was defeated in South Dakota. Something that happened outside of our service area, but something we're trying to keep an eye on, is in Washington State, since you've seen on the federal level kind of a pullback on climate change and carbon regulations, we're seeing states start to pick up the role and fill what they think is a need. In the state of Washington, this is their second attempt to try and institute a carbon tax. The tax was going to start at $15 a ton, go up $2 a year until 2035. So in the end, it would have been about a $47 to $50 per ton tax. The funds that they were going to do, they were going to use them for greenhouse gas reduction and renewable energy products, but that for the second time failed with about 56%, at least that's what the last numbers we had, was that it was failing. And now along with that happening at the state, on the federal level, there was something that was introduced, there was a carbon tax introduced this year that caught our attention for several reasons. Number one, when you normally see a carbon tax come in, it wants to do one of two things. It wants to punish coal and natural gas and reward renewables. And so that's normally been the way it goes. The carbon tax that was projected or introduced this year, it said what we want to do is we want to introduce a carbon tax, but for doing that, we want to eliminate gasoline and diesel fuel taxes. We also want to stop the introduction of greenhouse gas regulation on power plants. So that was kind of an odd way to do it, that we're going to tax it, but we're going to pull back a lot of existing taxes. The other item that was very interesting, it was how are they going to use the money? It wasn't going to be used for renewable energy or greenhouse gas. It was going to be used for infrastructure. So for roads and for bridges, that's where the money was going to be. Now it was introduced and failed, but I can tell you that that is probably going to be something that's going to be looked at again when you look at the dollars that are falling down and not coming in for roads and bridge repair, and along with other changes that are happening with vehicles becoming more fuel efficient, we think this is something that may come back again. Colorado had Proposition 112, which was a setback requirement for oil and gas and fracking from occupied residencies. That did fail also in Colorado. Nevada had an interesting thing where they wanted to deregulate everything. They just said, no matter who you are, if you're a company or an individual, you can buy your electricity wherever you want. You can generate whatever electricity you want and sell it wherever you want. That was wide open. That was defeated pretty handily. But one thing that did pass in Nevada was a renewable portfolio standard that said you need to have 50% renewable energy by 2030. Now that same measure was proposed in Arizona, was defeated, but passed in Nevada. So you're starting to see a lot of different things happen on the state level for greenhouse gas and again, efficiency regulation. At this point, we'd like to share just a few short videos that we've got sent to us from Senator John Thune of South Dakota, Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, and Senator John Helvin from North Dakota. Apparently you had to be named John in order to get your video played this year. So we'll start with Senator John Thune. Senator Thune served as South Dakota's lone member of the U.S. House for more than 3 terms, starting in 1996, and he served on the U.S. Senate since 2004. He serves on the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, where he serves as chair, and the Finance Committee. Senator Thune was instrumental in recently amending the proposed language of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that would limit a G&T's interest expense, drafting an amendment that ultimately was adopted during the Finance Committee's consideration of the bill and signed into law. The amendment ensures that taxable G&T co-ops such as Basin can continue to deduct all of their interest expense. Here's our message from John Thune.
Hi, I'm Senator John Thune. I wish I could be at your conference in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to deliver this message via video. I just want to say thank you to Basin Electric. Your organization serves 141 rural co-ops across the region, including 30 in my home state of South Dakota, including my hometown, West Central Electric. I just want to say how much I appreciate all the work that you do in delivering safe and reliable energy to people all across this region. And when disaster strikes and weather-related incidents come up, your folks are out there the first ones to get the power back on and deliver those critical services to people in our community. So thank you for doing that. It's been a really busy year in Washington, D.C., as you all know, particularly in the energy space. We're seeing obviously modifications to the Clean Power Plan, to Waters of the United States. We're seeing an increased emphasis on renewable energy. Wind energy continues to be a more affordable source of energy as technology continues to advance, and we want to continue to do everything we can to promote that and to make sure that South Dakota is harnessing and taking full advantage of a resource that we all know we have plenty of. When it comes to cybersecurity, as Chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, that's an issue that we pay a lot of attention to, and we just thank you for everything that you do to implement best practices when it comes to cybersecurity and protecting our critical infrastructure. I can't think of a more important priority when you think of all the bad actors out there that are trying every single day to hack into our systems. So I hope you have a great conference. Again, I just appreciate the great work that you do working with me and with my staff on issues that are of so much importance to the delivery of safe and reliable energy across South Dakota and across this region. We want to make sure that the people of our state and our region continue to benefit from the outstanding work that the co-ops do. Thank you. Hope you have a great conference, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Next, we'll hear from Senator John Barrasso. Senator Barrasso has served as a U.S. Senator in Wyoming since 2007. He is the fourth-ranking member in the Senate Republican leadership as chairman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee. He serves on committees that directly impact Wyoming's economy, energy interests, and public lands, national parks, and trade. He was instrumental in the passage of the 45Q tax credit and recently began work on PURPA reform, as well as the Use It Act to help further advance carbon capture research efforts such as the ITC. He has been a strong and consistent advocate for the energy industry. Here's a message from Senator Barrasso.
I'm very grateful for what you continue to do to provide affordable electricity for the people of Wyoming. You know, Wyoming is a state with massive amounts of coal reserves, and we have an incredible dry fork station with the integrated test center there where world-class research is being done on carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, and part of the X Prize, which allows opportunities for people to work to find basically uses for carbon dioxide that we haven't come up with yet. Whoever's going to do that, and I talked to high school kids in Casper about this last week, whoever can kind of come up with that and find a way to make a profit off of this carbon dioxide, they're going to be the next Bill Gates. The Bill Gates or the Elon Musk of the new generation to come. So they're excited about trying to do the research that they can do. Now, we're trying to help in Congress. There's bipartisan legislation, one called the Future Act, about making it easier for working with tax credits for the use of carbon dioxide, and another, the Use It Act, which is how we can capture and have the pipelines to move the carbon dioxide from place to place, and the research is related to it. But all in all, it's just about providing for our customers the available electricity at an affordable rate, and for using the resources that we've been blessed with, whether you're in North Dakota with the incredible world-class oil, and in Wyoming with the oil, the gas, the coal, all of it. We need all of the energy, we really do. When you take a look, though, at around the world, what we know is that 20 years ago, 40% of world electricity came from coal. 20 years from now, 40% of electricity worldwide is going to come from coal. People, and I talk to students about this all the time at high schools, universities, colleges in Wyoming, what they all know is that we are blessed with incredible resources. We cannot allow them to be stranded in the ground. They need to be used. And we need policies out of Washington that protect the resources that we have. I think President Trump was right when he talked about, cutting taxes, eliminating regulations, and unleashing American energy. We're going to continue to use our energy resources worldwide. It makes us a powerhouse at home. It drives our economy. Energy is called the master resource for a reason, and we're going to continue to use it worldwide. So I want to thank you for what you do, for your communities, for the people of our states. It makes a huge difference in their lives. Thanks, and have a very successful meeting.
Lastly, we'll hear from Senator John Hoeven. Senator Hoeven is North Dakota's 22nd U.S. Senator and began his term in 2011 after serving 10 years as governor of North Dakota. As governor, Senator Hoeven focused on developing North Dakota's energy resources and worked to advance the state's traditional energy resources like lignite coal, oil, and gas, and promoted renewable energy opportunities. As Senator, Hoeven has been leading legislative efforts to ensure workable guidance for those wanting to utilize the 45Q tax credit, as well as working on the extension of the refined coal tax credit, which helps our coal generation remain as competitive as possible.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to your annual meeting. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. Our electric cooperatives are an essential part of our energy industry. Your hard work helps ensure a reliable electric grid across the 9 states that you serve and provides affordable power for our homes and businesses. This is central to our quality of life and the continued growth of our economy. We appreciate all that you do. As a member of the Senate Energy Committee and Energy Appropriations Committee, I'm working to support you in this mission. To this end, we've made tremendous progress in providing relief from overly burdensome federal rules. This includes the moratorium on federal coal leasing, the stream buffer rule, and the EPA's unworkable and costly rules for coal power plants. We also continue to roll back the Waters of the U.S. rule, which we defunded in 2016 and 17. At the same time, we are working to help you develop new energy technologies, including through unique partnerships like the Alum Cycle Project. In our fiscal year 2019 funding legislation, which the President recently signed into law, we included $25 million to develop technologies similar to the Alum Cycle. Further, we provided $30 million for a new competitive grant for which the next phase of Project Tundra will be eligible. At the same time, I continue to advance my 45Q legislation, which will help make CCS projects more commercially viable, as well as my bill to extend the refined coal tax credit. These are just some of our ongoing efforts to help you succeed in your important work. Thank you again for the invitation. Best wishes for an enjoyable and productive event.
Well, the big rule that we've been talking to you about for several years has been the Clean Power Plan, and there was a lot of activity in that area this year. The new rule that came out was now called ACE, the Affordable Clean Energy Plan, Energy Rule, and it replaces the Clean Power Plan. We agree and we think that the ACE rule is much better than the Clean Power Plan. And it does several things. It focuses on inside the fence actions, and that's something that we were pushing for with the Clean Power Plan. And that simply says is if you're going to make plants more efficient and provide you less CO2, you got to use the technology or operations to happen on the plant, inside the fence that the plant is located. The new rule focuses on 7 technologies that are out there that can make your plants more efficient. And what they do is the EPA gave you the guidance or provides the guidelines to do that, but it leaves the states as the people that implement that plan. We think the ACE rule at this point is an achievable plan. Now, as with every rule that comes out, it's not perfect. We've got some issues with it. One of the main things that it does is it uses heat rate improvement as a measure, or is your plant in compliance or not? And the thing that the concerns we've got with the heat rate improvement, it is hard to measure and it's widely variable. Your heat rate improvements or your heat rate measurements will change depending on what load level you're running your plant at. If you're running your plant full out, you're going to have the best and the lowest heat rate. If you start running that plant at lower levels, that's going to change. It also can depend on your fuel quality, will change your heat rate. And lastly, it's how long ago was your last major upgrade? So as your plant gets done with that upgrade and starts to run, your heat rate is going to degrade as well, just as your plant gets or cars get ready for a new tune-up. So there's things that are of concern on that, but again, something that we think is achievable. We think a better way to do that would be look at your CO2 mass emissions, either your CO2 emissions on an hourly rate or a yearly rate. We think would be a little bit better way to measure, easier for us to do, easier for us to monitor, and for EPA to monitor as well. The ACE rule also provides a modification to new source review, but I'll get into more on that just a little bit later. The ACE rule came out on August 21st. Formal comments were submitted on Halloween. We submitted our formal comments, and just yesterday or the day before, we sent those out to the Class A's and the statewide. If you want to read all 47 pages, you sure can. Otherwise, we did put a one-page summary along with that. That's a lot easier to go through. We expect the final rule, as in this is a proposed rule, comments come in, they come out with the final rule. We expect that to come out around March of 2019. Now, it's going to take 18 months to 2 years to litigate this rule. We know it's going to be litigated, that's just the way it works. And so we still want to get that a court ruling on that rule before the 2020 election. So as you can see, you add 18 months, 2 years on to March, it's going to be tight to get that done. Also, the 111B rule, which is the rule for new plants, should be proposed out in December. Along with the new source review, that's modification that's in the ACE rule, there's also some other activities working on that. New source review is an air quality program, permitting program, and it was meant to prevent abuse. What they didn't want you to do was just have a power plant out there, go in there and change absolutely everything about it, put all new equipment in, and still call it an old plant or existing plant and qualify under existing rules. So new source review was meant to try and hold that down. The problem that it's turned to a hammer that EPA has used on plants and utilities. What's happened is EPA has called violations if a plant installed more efficient replacement parts, added emission control equipment, and did just routine component replacements. So utilities have been reluctant to make incremental changes in it because they didn't want to trip a new source review. So besides the ACE rule having a portion to fix it, there's also legislation as well that's been introduced to try and fix the new source review rule as well. The main change is that the existing new source review says if your annual emissions of regulated emission goes up, you could qualify for a review. The change would say if your hourly emissions of regulated emissions goes up, you could qualify. So that means if you're using a plant and it's more efficient, that's fine. Under the annual, you could make that plant more efficient, it could qualify in the market and run more, so your emissions would increase, but it's still a better plant. So that change we're hopeful for to make that happen. As I said, the House legislation has been introduced, it passed the committee, but it has not had a vote by the full House as of yet. Another rule that you've heard several of the senators talk about was 45Q, and the 45Q is a tax credit made available for use of CO2 if you use it in an enhanced oil recovery or if you put it in a sequestration project. The old rule was just dang hard to use. For an example, under the old 45Q rule, if we wanted to use it for enhanced oil recovery, Basin would have had owned the power plant that generated the CO2, and we would have also had to own the oil field that used the CO2. And so the new rule, the new change does several things. It eliminated that the cap that was on it, it made it a 12-year credit, and it increased the dollars amount for that rule. Now the legislation did get passed. The next step is the IRS has to write the rules on how it gets implemented. So we've been working to try and get those rules as flexible as possible. A problem that comes up with the rule is that 12-year clock. It starts as soon as you install carbon capture equipment on a plant. Well, you look at DGC, the carbon capture is already equipment is already installed in that plant. In fact, it's part of the process. In that instance, our 12-year clock started when the president signed the bill, which was last December of 2017. So we're trying to make those rules to be more flexible, to say you've got to have a full project. You got to have the capture equipment, and you got to have the sequestration or the enhanced oil recovery spot. Then it becomes a project, then your 12-year clock starts. So that's what we're working with the IRS to try and get those type of guidelines put in. We just want to make sure that if we get a chance to use that credit, it's available for us to use. The other activity we've been working on is PURPA, Public Utilities Holding Company Act. Again, this was implemented in 1978, and things are much different in 2018 than 1978. PURPA was put in to encourage renewable energy and energy conservation. The problem that it's run into is in some cases it gets abused by developers. And developers will say, well, we want to put in a 100 megawatt project, but we want you to buy the power. And we'll say, well, that's fine. Here's our market price for power. And if they say, well, that's not high enough, so we're going to take our 100 megawatt project, we're going to break it into 20 megawatt sections, put them a mile apart. That qualifies for PURPA, and then you have to buy the power, and you have to pay us avoided cost. So the fixes that are out there, and there's legislation that was introduced by Senator Barrasso and Tim Walberg out of Michigan, helps that. They allow utilities to challenge that 1 mile rule, and it drops that 20 megawatt threshold down to 2 megawatts. We think that will stop that type of abuse that's happening out there. Also, we've been working with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to do the same type of reform. FERC has said they've been talking about it, maybe doing something, but we haven't seen any action out of FERC at this time. So we support changes that are out there because for several reasons. We think the renewable energy industry is well established. There's no need to provide mandatory purchasing by utilities because there's good markets out there for them to sell their power to should they decide to do that. The other issue that's out there is grid resiliency. And grid resiliency is the efforts that have been going on by the administration and the Department of Energy to kind of force large baseload or dispatchable plants like large nuclear and large coal plants into the market. Now the problem isn't so much with our plants, but you get plants on the East Coast that aren't part of a utility that are simply independently owned, and the only way they get their revenue is from selling power into the market. Where utilities like Basin, we have got a rate base that can help cover those capital costs and ongoing maintenance costs, and the market takes care of the fuel cost. And several attempts have gone on from DOE to try and fix this. In 2017, if you remember, DOE proposed a rule to FERC that said we want to allow fuel secure plants to put all their costs into the market. And fuel secure meant if you had 90 days of fuel supply on site. And we opposed that. We said that's too much of a push into the market. In January of 2018, FERC said, no, we're not going to do that rule. That's not a good rule, but we'll open a docket on grid resiliency and see if there's changes that need to be made and what they can be done. So June of this year, DOE made another run at this and said, you know what, we're going to use the Federal Power Act and the Defense Production Act to force these power plants that are struggling right now into the market, and the market's going to have to buy their power because it's an issue of national security. Now that's been out there floating around, but just in October, the administration said, okay, done. We're not going to try and push that because we don't think that that's going to fly. So at this time, we're simply sitting back waiting for FERC to come up and get some action going on their ruling. We know they're looking at it. We provided comments on what should be done. We're waiting for them to do something. Basin's position is that we support a fair and equitable market structure for all generation types. And we know that the costs that get put into the market are the same costs that our members are going to have to pay for when it comes out. We also understand that there's, in our opinion, a lack of compensation. When there's a high wind day and low load, then the wind's covering most of the load. Our units have to throttle down to minimums and spin and lose money, but they got to be there, so when the wind goes down and the loads come up, we're there. So we think there should be a standby rate for those units to do that. We think there should be a ramp rate because we're able to schedule and ramp up and ramp down to meet market needs. So again, we just want to be fair and make sure that the services that are being provided to the market are paid for. Those companies or generators that are using the services are paying for those costs as well. The last thing we're getting into, as you heard Dave Ross talk about the drop in market rates that are out there, and we're seeing a lot of consumers, especially the industrial consumers, want to get access to those market rates. And in Wyoming, there's been a lot of activity taking place by a group called the WIAC, which is the Wyoming Industrial Electric Consumers Group. Again, large industrial consumers in Wyoming wanting to get access to market rates. They've got several proposals that are out there. Number one, they want to be able to contract with third party for their power without that generator being called a utility. So if you've got someone out there, say a gas processing plant that's got a generator, they want to be able to get to that power, but they don't want them to be called a utility, because then they got to cover and meet a lot of regulations. The second thing they want to do is they want to redefine the service territory that just says we're going to call the service territory where you at a point of delivery, so that if you got a gas processing plant that's got the ability to generate, they can build a power line to that and get that power, but that would be part of their service territory. And last thing, they want to make it easier for the Public Service Commission in Wyoming to regulate cooperatives. Now, they've been active on that. They provide presentations to the Wyoming Public Service Commission and to a Legislative Corporations Committee. The co-ops, with the help of the statewide and the industrial utilities, testified at both of those hearings and said this is not a good idea, and gave reasons why this was not a good idea. But this group is going to bring legislation in Wyoming in 2019, so it will be brought up and heard at that point. Now, we had similar bills happen in Minnesota in 2018, and we're thinking the same thing is going to happen in 2019. So you've got it happening in our service territory as you see in other states. At that point, that's kind of concludes our remarks for what's going on in the states and the federal and regulatory and legislative side. What I wanted to close by doing is just give you an idea of some of the activities that the Government Relations Department works at to really fight regulations, promote regulations or legislation, and do that. We engage with Congress on several different areas. We make regular trips to DC, and when we're there, we meet with either the senators or the congressmen or their staffs and talk about issues that are important to us. We also participate in legislative fly-ins. There's the Lignite Energy Council goes in on a regular basis. The Minnesota statewide goes in quarterly. NRECA has a legislative rally, which I'm sure most of you have participated in. And Basin Electric sponsors a fall fly-in as well that's participated with some of the members in our area. We also were able to testify at the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee hearing this year, and we were invited down to Iowa by Corn Belt and NIPCO when Senator Grassley came down to do a roundtable. We appreciate those types of invitations to get a chance to get in front of the actual congressmen and senators to talk about our issues. We engage with the executive branch and their agencies. With EPA, we spent a lot of trips there talking about how bad the Clean Power Plan was, how they should redo it, and then talking about the new ACE rule. A lot of meetings there. EPA also conducted listening sessions. They had a listening session in Gillette, Wyoming, talking about repealing the Clean Power Plan. Since that was a friendly audience, I went to that one. There was also an EPA session talking about the ACE rule held in Chicago, Illinois. That one's not so friendly, so we sent Tyler Hammond to that. The text I got from him was, I feel kind of like the guy handing out rosaries at a Satan convention right now. So I was glad I didn't go to that one. Also, we have opportunities when the agency folks come to the state. We had the EPA Region 8 Administrator come to Bismarck. We were able to get him to the Basin office, spent 2 hours, had a great conversation with the CEO and the staff talking about issues. The DOE Secretary Perry was also in North Dakota, held a round table. We were able to participate in that round table with Secretary Perry and talk about our issues. We also go in and talk with DOE about research and development dollars and technology funding. Lastly, we engage with the states. We work closely with our statewides in providing testimony at hearings during legislative sessions and outside of legislative sessions. This year, besides work we've done in North Dakota, we were invited to go to Montana to talk to the Environmental Quality Council about carbon capture and CO2 sequestration act opportunities. Also, most of the statewide have Capitol and Hill on the Hill Day. We participated those in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. The last thing I want to leave you with is we are very proud of the facilities we have, the coal mines we have, and we strongly believe that a tour takes away all the preconceptions that a lot of people have. So if we can get people out on site at our plant and in our coal mines, that's the best lobbying and the best education we can have. This year we were able to get a group of Minnesota legislators to tour coal fields and power plants, which has never happened before. We're starting to make more use of our facilities in Wyoming, the Dry Fork Station, and the Integrated Test Center. We were able to bring a national group called the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, which is a national organization for all you PUC, PSC folks. We were able to get them out and give them a tour. Plus, we've done a lot of other agency folks through the Dry Fork plant and ITC. So we think that is the best way to get people out there. So if you don't be afraid, if you're visiting with someone, to say, if you've got the chance, we'd love to give you a tour and show you our facilities. And with that, that's the end of our government relations report. Thank you for your attention, and hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.